Hello, and welcome to episode 1 of Into the Spotlight. I'm Morley.
And I'm Ryan. On this episode, we are proud to have our first official guest on the show.
Yes, joining us today we have my good friend and artist, Julia McGillicuddy. Hey, Julia.
Hey, guys.
How's it going? Thanks for coming on.
It's good. As good as things can be Sunday morning.
Yeah, Ryan and I have been making a list of guests for a while, ever since we started planning this, and you were one of the first people I thought of, and I'm happy this worked out. I think you are a perfect first guest.
Well, thanks, guys. I really appreciate it. It's very complimentary to be one of the first guests or the first guest.
Yeah, for sure. Do you want to tell the people a bit about what it is and what it is that you do in your art?
Yeah, so I'm a recent graduate of Parsons School of Design, and by recent I mean less than a month ago. And
Congratulations.
Congrats.
Thanks. Kind of a really weird time to graduate college, but hey. So I studied communication design at Parsons, which is essentially graphic design, branding, advertising, all within that realm. User design as well, but that's kind of more my professional artist route. And then personally, I create these hand-painted denim jackets. I also am working on a different project at the moment with women and football, and just kind of, that was my senior thesis. So anyways, primarily graphic design and a few other things on the side.
Sweet. Yeah, what a time to graduate art school. I imagine that thesis presentation was not quite what you expected.
No, it was actually the worst. It was not the worst, like in the way of like my work was bad, but it was like as if I could have been talking to like any random stranger on the internet. Like the lack of personal connection because it took place over Zoom instead of.
My.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Because I did my master's thesis presentation last year, and even that seen from people is just, I can't imagine just doing it through Zoom. The lack of, like you mentioned, personal presence, just there's something that's just intrinsically lost from that.
Yeah, and like the thing is, we also couldn't have our professors a part of it because they all had to be hosting the different presentations going on simultaneously.
Oh my. Okay, so it's all at once.
Yeah, so there was a massive schedule, and they'd have 10 thesis professors hosting different categories. The way Parsons breaks it down, like thesis at Parsons is a year-long process.
Okay.
And we work about 6 hours every week in class on thesis from August until graduation, right? So it's it's not like it's very anticlimactic to have it on Zoom. It's kind of what I'm getting at.
Yeah, exactly. You have all this build up and just like, oh. That's not the grand conclusion that you picture in your mind. No, I get that.
No, it's not. But
I find that like any final presentation can always kind of be like that. It's never.
It is. That's what it was like after I presented my master's thesis last year. It's like you get out after a few minutes, you're just like, oh, that's it. It's just like you just kind of breathe. You're just like, well, okay, what do I do?
Where's the confetti?
Yeah, exactly. Where's the
balloons?
Where's the fireworks? Like, come on.
I demand fireworks now, and I will have them. Well, you know what, though? My thesis professor is such a nice person. He recognized that the thesis didn't go well. It was very cold, and we all kind of gave him feedback. So he went out of his way and created a thesis for us, our own presentation for just my class. And he branded it for us. He created the flyers. He created all the digital advertising things so we could put out to family, friends, etc. Made an entire Eventbrite. Is that it?
Eventbrite?
Or is it Eventbrite?
Yeah, Eventbrite?
Eventbrite, so we could invite our friends and family.
Oh, cool.
And that made up for it. It really did.
That's nice. That's incredible. It's like it's like some way of like trying to make the best out of a not so great situation.
Yeah, because when you're presenting something that's so heavy, like a big body of work like that, breaking it down into a couple minutes when telling your family and friends about it is kind of hard. And it allowed for my family and friends to watch it instead of me being like, well, like, here's my PDF, or here's my 30-minute pitch to you.
Those like in-person presentations have such a different vibe. Like, so at the end of my engineering degree, we had to do a design project, which it wasn't the whole academic year. It was just the last semester. And part of it is the professional engineers who are watching it, they grill you at the end, as I think is in most like final projects, right? And that's like in person, and like you're expecting certain questions, you're not expecting others, and just reading everyone's body language is is, I mean, that kind of makes it pay off a bit more, I would think, when you feel like you get over that hump of being grilled in person, right?
Yeah, and it's kind of weird just shutting your laptop when you're done.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, I've talked about that with a lot of people. Like I have certain groups of people where I have like regular Zoom calls with, so it feels more natural than, like, people say like, oh, it kind of lacks a lot of the in person, but you can get to a certain level, but the payoff at the end where you're just closing your laptop and you're like, oh, now I'm alone, is so strange.
And it's just that feeling of, oh, I'm alone. You know, you're like, like normally if I was in person, the community at Parsons, like I didn't go to a normal college at all, like New York City, art school, all of that. So by senior year, you've kind of built a pretty strong community of friends, and especially in your major, because you spend so much time together at our graphics lab or what it may be, you know, doing these projects for thesis especially. So we'd all be there with each other, and that's something that you were like, so like just FaceTiming people afterwards, like to make up for that feeling.
Yeah. So I'm curious, like, obviously not a sort of typical college experience. So how do you feel like, having just come out of it, the overall experience of art school compared to what you expected?
Like what I expected Parsons to be like versus what it actually was?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh. Parsons is so funny because it is what you expect it to be like, but not at all still. Like there's such a lack. I knew that there was going to be a lack of community and friends when I went to New York. Like going into it, people would be like, you have to know that this is not normal college. And that sounds so obvious, right? But there's so many things along the lines where you're like, whoa, like I wanted to transfer freshman year, first semester. I was like, I don't like this. I don't like how it seems. It's really difficult to not only learn New York City, but to learn like art school and that shift. And then also, you know, Parsons in general. And the workload is really crazy because we have a normal class is at 2 hours and 45 minutes at the least.
Oh,
but
wow.
then
Those are some intense
really long
classes.
But then you have your studios, which are 6 hours long. And adjusting to being in a 6-hour class from 9 a.m. to 2:45 p.m. is really hard. But once you get over that hump, like once I got over that, like by sophomore year, I was like, oh, this is the best thing I could have ever done for myself.
Oh, that's great.
And you just meet so many creatives, and something that I'm trying to be really aware of is like keeping in touch with all of my friends from college who maybe aren't my best friends, but people I even had classes with, because those people go on to do so much. And just, you know, networking in the creative world, it's kind of a small place for New York. So yeah, I know that might not have been like the exact response you're looking for, but
I had no idea what to expect, because I've never like, all my creative pursuits are entirely like self-taught or things I've just was like, oh, that's interesting, I'm gonna try that. So I have zero experience in like an academic setting, like rigorously learning it.
Yeah, and that's the thing, like the classes at Parsons are so weird because you have to learn, there's a degree of things that you have to learn, right? Like you have to learn, freshman year we all take the same classes, and then from there you'll go off into your majors and take different classes. But I learned how to use like woodshop freshman year. Then this year I did letter pressing, and you have such a large variety that's great, but in other times you're like, I don't know if I needed to know this. Like I learned weaving.
Oh, cool.
That's a whole other story, but academically it's kind of a challenge now for me to think about the world after this and being creative on my own. And to have that yearning to learn new things and to be creative, and not just to be creating for professional use, because that's something I recognize a lot of other art students who are later on down the years say, I really miss creating just to create. Like that's been the best part about art school, is it's a constant, like, here's a new project, here's a new thing that you wouldn't ever think to do yourself.
Yeah. And how is those, like you mentioned, doing all these different types of art projects and different types of classes, how has that broadened your horizons, and how does that impact the projects that you personally love to do?
Oh, that's really great. You know, because there's so many things that, like I said, that I wouldn't think to do. Maybe like letter pressing, for example. I learned that I love screen printing, and I make these jackets that take me like 70 hours to make. and they're very intricate and hand painted and hand drawn on denim. And I have a really high demand for them to the point that I can't keep up with it, that it makes me overwhelmed and stop doing them. Yeah. But that's a whole other thing we'll get into. I use those screen printing techniques, though, to try to make the process faster when making denim jackets. So just like learning bits here and there that I can take and move forward with has been the best part.
Yeah, I kind of imagine art school gives you like a whole big toolbox of stuff. It's like, okay, now take this and go with it.
And they also gave us real toolboxes. Freshman.
Okay, that's just neat. That's just really cool. Do you get to like design them and everything?
No, they're like, oh my gosh, they're like these these red ones that are almost so basic. I can't even think of the name of the brand, because we all were required to take this class called 3D. Oh no, not even worth it. Space Materiality.
Okay.
It's so vague. So many of the terms that Parsons uses are very vague. You're like, what does space materiality mean?
I mean,
oh, I'm learning to make a lamp.
I think you find that in a lot of college in general. That you hear a class and you're like, what the heck does that you even do in that?
Yeah, no, Parsons also fooled me. I didn't realize my major had so much coding. Well, I use coding lightly, but they called it creative computing. And I was like, what the? Okay, fun.
Yeah, you can go so many ways with that.
We walk in, they're like, so HTML, CSS, let's sit down and break it up. Shocked.
Interesting.
Shocked.
You wouldn't think, but
I now know, like, it's actually very important, like, to be a creative, and especially within graphic design, to know, even to understand lightly the language and what's going on. A lot of jobs and a lot of professionals use that, and they think it's very important knowledge, because it is. And hey, that's not what I want to go into, and it's not my strength, because I creatively don't think I can process. I can't use that as a good creative outlet personally. However, I have so many friends who took those courses and were like, this is my thing. And they're so good at it. And they make websites, and they go on to do things that need HTML, CSS, JavaScript, whatever.
For sure. And like having a good website is so important for so many artists and creatives. Like it's really like your calling card. The first impression some people have of your work when they go and look it up.
Totally. Oh, it's so important.
Yeah, that's something I'm trying to get a better handle on, is like branding in general. And it's such a strange but important thing that I'm like trying to wrap my head around.
It's good to know.
I know.
That's why it's a good.
Because my knee-jerk reaction to branding is like, I don't want to have to worry about this. I want the quality to speak for itself and just like let it evolve from that. But it's not really realistic, because you can't have every single person who looks at your work know the entire story and just expect them to know that. Like you have to kind of craft it for them.
Yeah, it's important.
And that's pretty much like all I studied for 3 years. Like it's just the product is great. Like I had this one fantastic advertising studio class, and one of our projects was to take any random object that costs less than $5 at CVS. And we had to create an entire brand for it, an entire Instagram. We created 9 posts on that Instagram. We created the logo. We created the call to action, everything. And the pitch for the object, everything about it. And I picked birthday candles, but people picked sponges. It didn't matter, but it just mattered how you were selling it, what that story you're telling is, and how you're going to encapsulate it. And that project alone, I took so much away from it.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it was so cool. And branding is all about, like, you want people to see your thing and be like, ooh, what is that? And then they'll see that your product is good, and then they'll stick with it from there.
Exactly. And someone like myself who studied media and communications, understanding all these worlds, like I really like the different types of branding, simply because it's not about branding in terms of like marketing speak, but just establishing the identity of something, especially your work, and having it out there, just depending on the colors and the design, being able to show the world what this is, and eventually to a point where it's recognizable with you and your talents and your abilities.
Yeah. And Morley and I are kind of opposites in a way sometimes with this, I think, because Morley's like such a doer and just like started doing all of these, like it started as like hobbies kind of, and it's evolved so much. And whereas in like I focus so much on the background of all of that, like the storytelling, and like my work primarily is a lot of like branding. It's a lot of graphic design and those things, and the product, aka things that Morley does, is like that forefront. So it's
Yeah,
funny.
it's kind of like switched orders.
It's like yin and
Yeah,
yang in a sense.
it is.
Like one's really about the hands-on, and the other's like a bit about the visual imagery of it.
The
Yeah.
aesthetics.
Do you find yourself like hypercritical of bad branding?
Oh my God. It's funny you say that. Last night I went to my first outing in months is this brewery. My aunt and uncle really wanted to go I'm in North Carolina right now, so everything's pretty much open. There's nothing stopping the South, let me tell you. But but there was this like sandwich board poster, which for anyone who's unfamiliar, sandwich board posters are like when you walk up to a store and it's kind of those two angled dividers that has advertising on it, and they had this thing where it was like Carolina Brewery, like enter here, but then the picture, the JPEG of their logo was pixelated on this big sandwich board, and I was like, ugh, whoever they paid for this, get a refund.
Yeah,
Bad
it's like
work.
120 pixels and you can't make it out.
I was like, you printed this and said let's put it up? No.
It becomes less a JPEG and more of like abstract art. You're trying to make sense of what it means and what it looks like.
Yeah, no, I think about branding all of the time. I follow brands just if I like it. I don't even care if I won't buy the product. I want to see how are they going to evolve, what's their next step, like what did they start to do at the beginning. Like I've been thinking lately about making an entire separate Instagram for me to follow just for brands, because I follow so many accounts on my real Instagram that I don't see my friends anymore.
Well, that's like a problem with Instagram in general. It's like you go down one little rabbit hole and then your feed is trashed.
Yeah, it is. But
that's
go ahead.
really interesting. Yeah, I find myself like I'm peripherally like interested in brands and like, oh, that's like kind of a cool little rabbit hole to go down. But it's like, I think once like a lot of people in my space start doing a lot of woodworking, you become hypercritical of like details in millwork in houses. And you're like, who did that wall? That wall looks terrible.
I know, it's so funny.
And like if you move into an old apartment, you just see all like the old drywall patches or where someone filled in the hole with toothpaste.
People do that?
Oh yeah.
Oh my God, what?
A lot of college students who don't want to get any spackle. You put some toothpaste in the hole in a white
Okay,
wall.
That's
good
crazy.
to know. I didn't know that was a hack.
It's not a long-term hack, but it'll fool some people.
Oh my God, that's funny.
Yeah.
But storytelling to me is something that's so interesting within creative spaces, and seeing people who like have an idea, and I love personally like helping them out with the idea. This week, for example, I created a commission for my friend Megan, she started just like a freshwater pearl beading company during quarantine. She just started beading at home, and it did really well, and she made she did well in sales, is like selling out constantly. And so she wanted, as her graduation present, for me to create, from her parents, was for me to create a branding guidebook for her and help her with the logo and the storytelling. And it was so exciting this week, just putting together like helping her and what her mission is and helping her create, the call to action. And the name of it is Nimbus. And so now a lot of our branding was about clouds too. So I've been looking at the sky this week and like, I think about Nimbus. Like I love when those things translate into real life and you think about it past being on your screen or your computer.
That's fantastic. It's always so exciting to finally get the ideas in your head and make them a reality. That's how I felt when I was doing my master's thesis and I was making my documentary, and how I ended up meeting Morley in the process. And it was such like a rigorous process. But eventually once you get there, you're done. Like you just don't think about it. You just look at it. You're just like, wow, it's here. It's real. It's this tangible thing that was in my mind that's now real. It's such a nice moment. And how does that relate when you, in your creativity, what does that mean for you when you're able to finally get something make it a reality for yourself? What does that mean for you?
Oh man. Well, it's so hard to let go of things for me. Like I almost find that there's never a moment where I'm like, oh, I'm done, which is
that's
blessing and a curse. Blessing in a way because like, oh, that's great. Like you're a constant, like you want to keep growing this project and you want to keep growing as a designer, but like a curse in a way because I never have that satisfactory moment of like I mentioned earlier, I make these jackets and the name of that brand is Workmens Denim, which all started from one school project freshman year at Parsons. actually it started in high school, but anyways, when I'm making these jackets, they take me so much time, and I just want to be done the entire time. I'm just like, I'm ready, and I need to enjoy that process more. And I've been working a lot on trying to enjoy the process of the in-between and making that process more enjoyable. So that way, when I have those moments at the end where I'm like, I don't know, maybe I can have a better like feeling and be like, yeah, no, I think this is good. Because when I want to hand it off to the customer, and that's the moment where once I see them wearing it, I can be like, oh, like that's a finished piece.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like with every sort of craft, there's different moments where you have that like moment of satisfaction, like you feel the best about it. I know for me, like if I make like a leather piece for someone, like their first reaction when they see it in person, if I'm giving it to them in person, is like, that is an awesome feeling.
The best.
Because when you're working on something by yourself, you get so much tunnel vision, and I don't know about you guys, but like sometimes I like really don't know if something is good or not.
Yep.
Like, I
No
think
idea.
this is technically good, but I've kind of lost perspective, which is why it's great having my workspace in our living space, and Eden can just pop over and I can get her like knee-jerk reaction.
Yeah. That's,
Sometimes it's not so great because it's not what I wanted, but
I know. No,
Yeah.
that's actually something you brought that up, Morley, about like people. I'm gonna miss that the most about Parsons. One of those things is that I felt like, and I didn't feel like I was surrounded by such strong designers who I like cannot believe that I was even able to be around them. Like their work it's kind of like the bars here meet it. And that's kind of how I always looked at Parsons. Like when other people didn't meet that bar, it felt like not disrespectful towards my work, but kind of like, hey, like you've got to match me. Like this is where we're at. And like, so moving forward and not being surrounded by those designers to give input and to help out, like is going to be an adjustment, because those opinions and voices are so important to hear from not just one type of designer or one friend. Because sometimes I don't take advice from friends. Because I'll be like, what do you know? All my friends are designers. I'm just going to ask them. Like, and which is not great either. So
yeah,
finding that
like
middle
you need
ground.
that balance.
Yeah, exactly. But the feeling of giving someone a jacket and they're like, shut up. Like, this is amazing. Oh my gosh.
It's just complete
It's so
validation.
good.
It's like all of this was worth it.
Yeah, totally. Totally.
Well, there's nothing worse than making something that took a lot of work and you think is really beautiful, but no one else cares about it.
Yeah.
Well, there are worse things, but that's not a great feeling.
Like that one is one of the
But
worst though.
it makes sense because like
Yeah.
there's so much of ourselves invested into our work. It's not just something you just do. It's something that you spend so much time and care and effort, and you always want it to be good. You always want it to be well received. That's why when I was showing my documentary off, I was jittery because like I spent like over a month in the dark room with like the laptop shining on my eyeballs trying to like make sense of it.
Yep.
It's so different when you're making like a documentary or like a video because like you think you're the general, you're planning it all out in advance, and then when you're making it and editing it and filming it, you're the soldier in the trench basically trying to make sense of it, and you don't know if the battle's being won or if it's being lost. But
Yeah.
And-
I finally watched Once Upon a Time in Hollywood a couple weeks ago, and that scene when Margot Robbie's character Sharon Tate is watching her movie in the theater and she's trying to like gauge all the reactions from everyone around there it's funny. Like I feel like when you first see Sharon Tate go to the theater, you're thinking like, oh, she's being so vapid, she's being so superficial, like she wants to see herself on the screen and she's all full of herself. But then you kind of realize that like, oh, this is her first big role, and she's really reveling in the experience of like other people enjoying her work. Especially I can't imagine the film industry, like you work on this movie for a year and the payoff is like 2 hours and then that's it.
that's it. And like, yeah, like you're putting
Yeah.
2 years of your life into making a movie and people can judge it within 2 hours, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. And it's funny that you bring up that scene of her going to the movies because, like just before that, she goes and like the box office person doesn't recognize her. That actually happened to Tarantino at one of his movies. He went to go see it and like the person didn't recognize
Oh,
them.
really?
He's, oh, sure, you're the director. It's just really funny thinking about that in hindsight.
That's hilarious.
That is funny. But I kind of am.
Sorry, go on.
I should say I'm kind of jealous in a way of film where you can almost look around and see those reactions. Like you can't always do that with so many other forms of art.
True.
Yeah. unless like I guess architecture has a similar scale.
Yeah.
And you can go live in the
Are
thing.
you kidding? I react to
Yeah, it
architecture all the
lives
time. They're like, whoa, look at that. No, I'm kidding.
Yes, no, I do that too, actually.
So I wanted to talk a little bit more about the jackets. So they're very distinctive, and I really really like them. When I see them, the first thing I think of is like Keith Haring's art. So I'm curious. I mean, I saw your reaction. Like, was that a bit of it? Was that an inspiration?
No,
or?
I knew you were gonna say. Everyone says it. Everyone says that.
Yeah.
And I have such a knee-jerk reaction to it because I love Keith Haring. I love pop art. I love Andy Warhol. I'm not ashamed to say it. I know that okay, well, going to art school, that makes me sound very basic because so many artists will be like, oh, yeah, so does everyone else. Like, and it's like, okay, elitist, shut up. I really like this, who I like, okay?
Yeah.
But I
went
really
to his museum in Pittsburgh, and that gave me a huge appreciation for him.
He's so wonderful.
Like, it's not just Campbell's soup cans.
Oh, no. You know what? Andy Warhol, brief divergent, my thesis, my God, you guys, my professor at Parsons, not my thesis professor, one of them, my screen printing professor, she was one of his screen printers. And anyway, she would create his screen prints for him in his factory.
Small world.
And
incredible.
Small world, but it's actually very sad because they did a lot of the work for him. And she used to own a lot of the pieces that she made. But then, like, some of them were stolen from her, or she sold them for, like, a much cheaper price when she was younger in college and just didn't really know. And so it's, like, too painful to go to, like, a MoMA exhibition or anything like that because she could see her own work on the walls, but it's Andy Warhol's. So I have mixed feelings sometimes about that.
So
but
strange.
Yeah, I know. But either way, I still love Andy and I love Keith Haring. And with the jackets, like, that is something so personal to me that I never, like, was looking at other inspiration for it. It's kind of like I have ADHD, and it all really began because in high school I would doodle on these pieces of paper, like my math test, a science test I'd get back, and I could cover the entire sheet from top to bottom with just teeny intricate little things because I don't know, that's just kind of how my mind worked. It was kind of like a physical manifestation of like different rivers and flows in my mind. And so my art teacher, she's a wonderful woman, Miss Stason. She would see these and she'd be like, you should make this into something more physical. And so she pushed me into making, like, I started making Vans sneakers for one of my AP art projects in high school. And then she
I remember this.
Yep. Yeah, you have to create an entire, like, capsule kind of for AP art classes. And so I made an entire capsule based off of TED Talks and making patterns. And then the evolution was then next she wanted me to make a pair of pants. And I bought like these white jeans from Target, like cheap, which all of this is a part of the learning process too, of like materials. Like as this developed, like that's actually a really bad material for me to buy, like cheap. It's not good because then ink can kind of flow into cracks if they are too stretchy. But like I said, this is all growing. So when I first made those jeans, that I spent maybe like, I used like a 0.7 ballpoint ink pen. Psychotic, crazy of me to have done that. I've now never do that now, never. But those jeans probably took me over like maybe close to 200 hours to make, and I had them photographed, and that was actually one of the reasons why I think I got into Parsons too, was because of those jeans. There's this thing called the Parsons Project where you have to create, they'll have like a question or some type of prompt, and you have to create a piece of work or works off of that. And I submitted my jeans for it, and they were really well received. So I made those jeans, and then I finally freshman year had a project where we had to create almost like a book where you had to do an instruction book of a how-to guide of something, you know, how to eat an orange, how to make a denim jacket, how to do whatever. And so I made a denim jacket. I physically made one, and I made the back of it a how-to guide on how to do that.
Oh yeah, that was so cool.
Yeah, and that was the first thing I did, and I wore it to my work. So freshman year, I was an intern at this jewelry company called Mignon Gavigan, and I wore that jacket into the office, and it was a small office, maybe 10 people, and the founder saw me wearing it, and she's fantastic. She also went to Parsons, and she was like, I want one of those. Can I commission you to make one? And I was like, of course. I then spent 4 months slaving over making her this jacket, and that one still to this day I think is my favorite, because I was so nervous about it that it was like the perfect in-between world. Like where the jackets are at now, I have levels of how intricate they can get because I know how much time they're going to take me, but this one is like that perfect in-between zone before I kind of got a little too large with figures, and they're still really intricate, like the pants that I made, but it's so personal, and every jacket is a one-of-a-kind piece. I'd like to make a list of things about where did you go to college, like what is the name of all of your siblings, like what street did you grow up on, what's your favorite color, what is your dog's name, what is your favorite number, what's your favorite like your mother's name, everything. Write it, major list, and I'll just do like my own personal brainstorm about the person because I get to know them. But now as the jackets have grown, I know people less and less, so I have them write questions out for me, and I will fill in the cracks throughout the drawing, like their names and all of that. So to go back to your question, Morley, about Keith Haring, I sometimes get frustrated when people say like, oh, it looks just like Keith Haring, like, which is such a compliment, of course. He's an amazing artist.
Yeah, but it doesn't sound like your inspiration in any way came from him. It just happens to have a similar aesthetic.
Exactly. He's someone I really like and look up to, but it's unrelated to my process and unrelated to where this all started.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
Yeah, and I want people to recognize something as something that I'm doing and not something someone else did, and oh, that kind of looks like theirs. But hey, I'm not going to change the jackets, so that question's probably not going to go away. No. So,
yeah. And the jackets are so incredibly well done. Like just seeing the design, and like you mentioned about like all art, I think we all draw bits and pieces from things either unconsciously or consciously, but we always recontextualize them into something new. Like what you're doing on your denim jacket designs are completely original in that aspect. And there's just so much detail in each one. What are some like the visual elements and imagery that you like to draw upon, or concepts that you have in your mind that you put into your designs?
Yeah, that's a great question, because when I'm drawing them, it's kind of, I don't plan any jackets out. I will plan them out in a sense now that they're much more, there's kind of more of a structure with the commission. Like it started with me making one jacket and something like, oh, I love that. Can I have basically the same thing? And you're like, okay, so you want your name at the top here, like just to be clear, are you okay with all those colors that I used? Like whatever. And I don't want to continue to make that same type of jacket, so they've evolved, but like I now will plan them out a little bit more structurally, being like, okay, do you like flames? All right, we're going to do flames at the bottom, or we'll do them at the top. Or, I made a sorority jacket, so the girl I did an all blue jacket, so I made an entire constant color palette of different blues and hues within that. And then we want to have Kappa Kappa Gamma at the top, and maybe like that Kappa Kappa Gamma, they use keys. So I'll add little keys throughout, or I'll take imagery that's personal based off each project, but when it comes to larger base things, like that's where I kind of will start to look at Pinterest or online things to like things that I wouldn't think about, like flames or something larger, to make them more distinctively different. Mm-hmm. But a lot of it's geometry. A lot of it's back to shapes, and I like when things fill in because it looks like this river and it's flowing, and I want things to stick in that. I love handwriting though. I think it looks so good. So letters. Yeah. It's
cool. I almost imagine like this could be a really interesting branding project to make like an animation from because everything looks very fluid on the jackets, of like everything wiggling into place. Mm-hmm. It does look like you said, like there's a ton of physicality that goes into it. I'm actually impressed that you can like describe the process so well, because I can see in it that like you're just, I imagine when you're doing it a lot of the time, you're not consciously thinking about like the final shape, but like you're just kind of feeling your way from one thing to the next.
Yeah, and that's why I can't really sketch them out, because that's how it works. Like how this even happens is that I'm going. And the more I think about it, sometimes the worse of the outcome. It's more mentally draining. And it's a marathon, not a sprint. When I'm making these jackets, they can take me 2 months longer, sometimes less if I'm behind. And I try to stick to a deadline that I give myself when telling a customer, like, hey, you're gonna get this by here, especially if it's for like a birthday present or whatnot. But I have to like just keep going and allow my mind to kind of be free with the shapes. instead of overthinking it, because once I do that, like I'll start to catch up to myself and like realize how much I have left, or because there's so many breaking points where I'm like, oh, I don't know what I'm going to keep doing, and then I keep going, and then I'll be like, I have no idea what I'm going to fill in this entire arm, and then I just do it.
Yeah, as we were saying last episode a lot, it's always a process. And it's like it's amazing like how much of these answers kind of come down to that. Like I know in my own work, so much of my growth has been figuring out like when am I productive in different ways, and if I reach a block, how I can kind of get back on track. And like there has to be a certain amount of angst, I think, in art for it to like be something great, or like at least a little bit of uncomfort, like, or discomfort, but just to make it sustainable is quite a process.
I think we all need that sort of butterfly feeling in the stomach, but it's also a good motivator as well, because it always keeps us conscious and self-aware of what we're doing. Like we're not just going down some endless rabbit hole that kind of puts us in a bad position. I think it's always good just to have that. I don't know, like I heard like one filmmaking mentor of mine always told me like nerves are good, so it's always good to have that part of you as you're doing it. I don't think you can create and put your personal self into something without having those nerves, because it's just naturally intrinsic.
Yeah, because everything that you do in art or just creatively, a lot of it's a representation of you in your mind, and that's like a very physical manifestation of something that you're thinking about. That's so separate from maybe doing like, I don't know, accounting or whatever, something that's a lot more structured.
Yeah.
So it's like a piece of you physically.
I want to go back to something you said. You were talking about that first jacket you made at Mignon Gavigan, or not first, but that jacket that you like put so much energy into. And I have a similar experience where I look at some of like my earlier leather projects, and it reminds me of the White Stripes in a way. Like a lot of people love the White Stripes because of how like innocent a lot of the sound is, and like it's not refined, it's not the best drumming in the world, and there's no way, like no amount of practice can get you to that level of like genuine feeling. And I look at some of my earlier projects and I'm like, oh, that was such like a cool project because I didn't really know how to do it at the beginning, and I don't know if I were to go into it in the same way, if I would do it again. Like I would want to make something different, and in my mind, like a little more refined.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes any sense, but I've had a similar feeling looking back at those earlier projects.
Because it's learning. Like I have the first jacket I really made, I have for myself, and that's the only thing I own besides the pants, and I don't wear either of them really. The pants I could never wear because that'd be insane. They're so detailed. And I would be so scared the whole time. But the jacket, like, it's funny because parts of it are almost falling apart. Like, I went to Goodwill and I bought, like, a $5 Gap jacket. And for the jackets now, right after that one was made, I realized, whoa, you can't use anything stretchy because, like I said, the ink will kind of start to sink into it. And then I moved on to using exclusively, like, vintage Levi's denim jackets. So that way they, like, will never do that. But, like, it's kind of fun looking back at that mistake and owning that piece and being like, oh, it's so delicate because it's like that first prototype. Like, yeah, it's very personal. Like I wouldn't want anyone else to have that because they'd be like, whoa, no, you don't get how to keep this. Like, you don't know how this works. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very innocent. I had no idea.
I guess what I was trying to say earlier is like it's impossible to like replicate the outcome that comes with that initial innocence. Yeah, it is what it captured the moment.
Yeah, well. Exactly. Yeah. Like, because if I was to do any of that now, I'd be like, so that's purposeful? That's kind of dumb. Like, like you've learned better now.
Yeah. Even when I look back at some of the things I've done, it's always it's always like moments of place and time, like the moment where you were in your creative abilities, and you're able to learn and draw upon those for what you will do in the future. Mm-hmm. Like I've always found that like even like things that have worked or things that have crashed and burned, because Murphy's Law, whatever can go wrong will sometimes go wrong. And it's always important to have those experiences, good and bad, because it always helps inform your decisions and your creative outlook later down the road. And just building off of that, how has your creative process evolved and changed over time in that regard, from when you first started this through art school to now?
I am way better at documenting my work. That's one of my biggest takeaways, is like how I'm documenting it, how am I saving my files, you know, if I'm working on graphic design stuff, like being more organized in a sense. So it's easier for me because I created so much work in school that like I didn't really save very well, I didn't document very well, so it's like kind of as if it didn't happen. And so that's one thing from the get-go that I try to make sure I'm really good about. And then additionally, just making sure that I have a better work environment. Like I tend to procrastinate a lot. But I'll pull an all-nighter. I will always make it happen. You know, like you will get that final project, but how I am going throughout that process might not be pretty for me. It might not be good. And so trying to have a better spaced out availability of work so I can enjoy the process more and make sure that like the pieces that I'm making have better longevity, they're more professional. Yeah, they kind of are aging as I age too, in a way where it's like more timeless, less in the moment. I don't know if that makes any sense.
No, it does. It does make sense. It does make sense. And like we mentioned before, it's always a process. Sometimes that process is messy or it can be inconsistent, you know, because I'm like that too. But in regards to procrastinations, like some days I have an idea that falls in my head. I'm like, oh, I go after this. And like you said, like I can spend like 12 hours working on something and then I won't touch it for a little while. But it's always kind of a good thing because I can come back to it with fresh eyes and see it in a new perspective and build upon it in a different way.
Yeah.
I heard
sleep helps. Sorry.
No, sleep's important. I heard an interesting interview a while ago about how kind of our culture looks down a lot on procrastination as a valid work method. And like, I think most people would agree that it's not the most sustainable way of doing things because it doesn't feel great. But I think there's something to be said for like working on things when they feel right. And sometimes like people just work really well under pressure. And like some people are check things off a list people. And people are like, I need to work on this straight for 18 hours.
Yeah. And
not in little chunks.
Well, my thesis professor said something really, really good to me. He said, first of all, that might just be your process. Like, that's just how you work. So accept it. And I was like, you're right. Because when I look back on all 4 years of art school, that's how I did everything. Like, it's not like, oh man, I've just procrastinated. It's like, no, I almost intentionally, like, that's just how I felt I could work best. But he also told me, like, it takes you 10 years to understand 10 years to understand time management as a designer. And I thought that was crazy. He's like, that's how long it took me. That's how long it takes everyone. Like, maybe 10 years from now you'll get it. Like, you will. But it won't happen 5 years. It's not going to happen overnight. Like, it's going to take a lot of time, and then eventually you're going to have that. So I'm trying to also just kind of enjoy this moment and enjoy how I'm working now and realizing that I'm going to continue to evolve in that process. And maybe it'll be better for me later down the line, but maybe this is better for me right now.
Yeah. I relate to that. Sorry, go on, Ryan.
Thank you. Sorry. So yeah, that's a very important thing to know, I think, for all creatives of all types. And just drawing from that answer, what are the most important lessons that you have learned from your experiences as a whole?
It matters how you show up.
How you show up.
Yeah. And so that one sounds so weird, I know.
Yeah.
But it's showing up in a lot of different ways. It's not like how you look, how you're dressed. Sure, that's kind of part of it, but it's kind of, that's something that stuck out to me all of senior year, freshman year. But I think back to freshman year too. Like, how are you showing up mentally? Like, am I mentally present? Like, am I taking in the advice that I'm getting as a designer? Like, am I present to enjoy other people's work? Am I giving the best creative feedback to other people? Like, how is my work with the presentation? Like, am I giving it my all, like everything, and like being cognizant of my space as a designer and like to be allowed to grow, I guess. That's something that I have been trying to work on and keep aware of, like, how am I showing up?
Yeah, I noticed that a lot, like when I go to art museums. Like, I think when I was a good bit younger, I didn't enjoy art museums as much as I did now. Like, I was seeing the same art, but if you're going in with like a different mindset it can be such a different experience. Like you can have the best professors in the world giving you the best advice, but if you're not like open to reception, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
So you're right. That's kind of like what it all comes down to.
Yeah. And I always struggle. Like I said, I'll work all the way up until the last minute, and then maybe I'm not so present when I'm getting that feedback or receiving and giving to other people. And I think, like we talked about earlier, it's so personal, and like what you say to other people matters, and like how your art is perceived to you matters. So I want to make sure that all of that experience, like the aftermath, is something that sticks with me for a long time. And I want to make sure that I have the best experience with it. Cool. Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah, I don't know. It can be really draining.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. That I understand. Oh, man.
Yeah.
But it's funny. It can be really draining. Like after I finished my thesis, because I worked on it from like September 2018 all the way up until August 2019. And, after that, I was like, okay, I'm done. I want to take a break. And then after like maybe 3 weeks, I thought, okay, what's next?
Yeah.
It's this weird sort of like recurring, like it's just always intrinsic. You're always looking forward to like what's the next thing happening.
Yeah. And I think with the saying it matters how you show up can also be applied to like it matters how your work is perceived. It matters how like, if you're seeing my senior thesis, which is called Equal Fans, like what is that first impression for you? How is that showing up for how you're interpreting it or other people? Because first impressions too with a project like that you're like so like you almost have the blinders on the whole time, and then suddenly someone else is seeing it that has no idea what this is. Like how are they interpreting it? I always try to think about that.
Yeah,
that's incredible.
Like, I mean, you think back on like all the people you've met, and like how much does that first impression stick out to you as like part of their personality or like how you judge them?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I know.
I was looking. Oops, sorry.
No, you go ahead. I talk a lot.
There's no problem. The Canadian will have a say. No, I was looking at your EcoFans website because as I was doing research for this episode, and it struck me because I have a friend of mine, who did her master's thesis project in my program on a very similar topic about women in baseball and fans and representation and media and everything else. So I thought,
Really?
I was like, oh my gosh, I thought like it's like not something I never thought I would see again, but I saw it. And can you just tell us a little bit about EcoFans and what it's about?
Yeah. Oh, my child. It's so basically I am from Massachusetts originally. I'm from Boston, well, outside of Boston, and so I watch football a lot I'm an avid Patriots fan and sports fan in general, but living in New York City and throughout all of college, I've always found it to be really hard to find other women to watch football with. Like a lot of the time I end up watching it by myself, like, which is fine, like it's okay, but I'll literally go to bars alone. Like I've almost gone to games alone. But it's like pulling at teeth to find other people, and like it shouldn't be that way. Yeah. So I was describing this problem to a friend of mine at the beginning of thesis, and they're like, wow, it sounds like that's your problem, like that's your thesis. And I was like, oh, you're right. And I did more research and I looked into it, and it's like astonishing how many women are actually fans of the NFL that I had no idea. Like 82.8 million, estimated 82.8 million women in the United States alone are fans of the NFL. 46% of the NFL's fan base is female and growing, because the NFL wants to continue to grow it. And I was like, whoa, like I have to do, like, why isn't there something better? Like, why is the only resource that I really have as like a female fan of football is like ESPNW? And that's not, they don't even get similar time, similar resources, a lot of it. And I love Barstool Sports, love it or hate it. I know there's a lot of controversy.
No, it's hilarious.
They have a really good community. Like the way they built their foundation is strong. And I was taking things like the community built based part of Barstool, which I follow closely. Which, by the way, all my podcasts I listen to are by men talking about football, which is okay. But, like, why am I not listening to any podcast about women, like, talking about football? Like, why is there usually only, like, one woman who has to be a part of it? Like, for the NFL Network, they only have, for every 4 on-air talent men, there's 1 woman in the entire company, which is pretty crazy because they're kind of their representation of the NFL itself, right? Mm-hmm. So, anywho, long story short, I could talk about all those statistics for a really long time, but I'd like to get to the project, I guess. It's just like creating that space, creating that online space, you know, taking parts like how Barstool Sports has community and being like, okay, well, why can't I have that but for women? And, you know, similar to The Wing, I don't know if you're familiar with The Wing, but The Wing is a female-only working space. They started in New York City, and they're all over DC, Boston. I believe they have a Toronto location. Anywho, very strong branding, very cool, feminist. So things like that were my inspiration. And then making a platform that kind of challenges like the very male and pale state of modern football culture. And making it something that like my roommates who don't know anything about football would want to be a part of. For me to find other women to be able to go to games with, to watch games with, to, you know, talk about it with, because there's a lot of, there's a huge stigma, I feel like, being a female football fan. And I wanted to create this brand that also is very neutral, that didn't fall into a stigma of like having pastel colors. And so the branding itself is a big process for me. So anyways, Equal Fans is a website primarily at the moment. That's kind of the home base for the platform to host all of the different pieces of content. And then I have 3 different pieces of content. Like there's the digital tailgate, which is essentially me talking about anything culture related. Like me maybe hosting a tailgate at my house, like me talking about that in a blog. Whatever, different forms of content, and then making it very shareable for Instagram, social media. And then I have an Instagram page, and I eventually want to have a podcast and more, but this is the starting point.
Incredible.
It's funny when you say like the male pale state of football culture, I just immediately think of like I feel like the NFL has almost memed itself, as has like ESPN broadcasters, in that like you have this crazy shiny room, everything's blue and reflective, and these like 6'7" jacked out of their mind dudes stuffed into suits. Yeah. And like, what am I watching? Like, first of all, why do these guys have to be wearing the most tight, uncomfortable looking suits in the world and being like, look like they're on a spaceship?
I know, the fashion's so funny because they all bounce off of each other with the fashion too. Like, yeah, they sit their bar and then the others will match it, and then it's really, there's always one guy who's
which is also a very male like trait in itself, the like the one-upmanship, right?
Oh yeah,
because one guy has to be like really different with his designer suits, and then they're like, can you get a load of this guy? And it's like, okay, yeah, I don't know why he's wearing a brown suit with a red tie and like ugh. But yeah, it's like, why isn't it gotten better? Like, why isn't it better? And I find that a lot of this comes from an educational standpoint from the beginning, like how we're taught football, like at a young age, how boys are taught football because they could play football, right? And like women can't, quote unquote, can't play football. Yeah. So you don't learn about it as much. And because I grew up in a household that watched football a lot, I wanted to make this something that's accessible to people who didn't grow up in those places, because it's a very intimidating sport that you're not going to become 25 and suddenly be like, I want to learn about the Green Bay Packers. Why would you? But like, I want more women to want that. I want more women to have accessible language, because with ESPN too, like those guys in those suits, they love to toss around numbers and they love to toss around football terms. And terms within football aren't very accessible. It's not like, even with baseball sometimes, but there's some sports where like, oh, this is really obvious what they mean.
Yeah, but it's always important to have these spaces, because sports is culture like anything else, and there's creativity that revolves around that. So it's always important to have these
like
important areas of culture be accessible to everyone.
And that's awesome that like after working on it for months and months, like you still want to grow it and you're not sick of it. It sounds like a really cool project.
Yeah, I've had to take a little bit of a break though, personally, because I interviewed a lot of actual real people. Like I interviewed Taylor Biscotti, who is the youngest female on-air talent for the NFL Network, and she's great, so cool. I also I also spoke to 2 of Barstool Sports' bloggers, Trista Kirk and then Kate Minion, who talked more about being a fan. Like one of them is much more fan-based and the other is much more stats and worked for like USA Today and whatnot. So I have all these real interviews and just putting them together and making sure that they receive, hey, I used your work, here it is, I want you to know like this is your words, and making sure all of it's perfect, because you work on it for so long, and then with everything that happened with like just being online and at home, like I kind of needed a break to decompress, to make sure that all of this is the best work possible and not just happening to happen. And also football's not happening right now.
Yeah, no, honestly, good time to take a break.
Can we just be
What are
honest?
sports?
Yeah.
What are sports anymore?
Well, I guess the
Find
UFC
out about them.
and a bunch of my buddies are following Korean baseball.
Yes, everyone's following Korean baseball because it's happening.
That's amazing.
They need
I
that
know.
outlet.
They're probably doing better than the Blue Jays anyway. So.
I know. But yeah, I think that it's something that once sports start up, like football starts up a little bit more again, I'm gonna want to continue to add more and more, like my motivation, because it's the whole reason why it started. Like, I don't think this is a project that I can just start and then stop and turn off, because I watch football so much, and every time I watch it again, I'm probably gonna be like, wait, why didn't I continue with this?
Yeah.
You know, especially not to be too technical or like money driven, but like financially too, like advertisers. There can be way better. Why do I have to watch Ford Truck of the Month? Why? Why can't I watch something that's more like, there are way more brands that I'm sure would love to advertise towards these viewers who like are getting pigeonholed into being only like men only. Like,
yeah. I mean, it also kind of shows how stuck in the past like TV broadcasters are. Like massive amounts of resources, very traditional advertisers. Like they're not really moving the same way that like podcasts and digital content is, with like much more diverse, interesting advertisers that are more relevant to the people that are listening to it.
Yeah, the contrast it's really interesting, because on the media-based side, you could also say like these are long-standing contracts with advertisers, right? But then with podcasts, there's not that long 10-year contract to be showing Ford or whatever it is. Like, it's all these different small brands that are constantly growing. I think it's so interesting.
Yeah, it's much more vibrant for sure.
Totally.
Sweet. Well, that's super exciting, and I'm excited to see how it grows.
Me too.
All right, we are coming up on an hour, so why don't we move on to our next I know it flew by. That was a great talk. Let's move on to our next segment, what we are putting in the spotlight this week. Ryan, do you want to kick that off?
I will happily kick that off. All right. So for this episode, I want to put a spotlight on the film Fruitvale Station, directed by Ryan Coogler and starring Michael B. Jordan. It is the directorial debut of Ryan Coogler, and the film chronicles the events leading to the unfortunate death of Oscar Grant that happened on New Year's Day in 2009 in San Francisco. It's a very good film, and also very timely as well, due to current issues surrounding racial injustice and discrimination and police brutality. It's a film that really gives some insights and to help us, because this film chronicles the events of the last day of this person's life and just how these are senseless and cruel tragedies that don't need to occur, and that these are people at the heart of these things. Like, we hear about them in the news, and sometimes we hear about them in the news and it goes on, and it's always about just putting a spotlight on who these individuals were, because like Ryan Coogler worked with, like, you know, he worked with the family trying to get, you know, the understanding of who this man was, and just some of his issues going on in his life before this terrible death happened. So it's a very good film, and it's one that, you know, as we're having these conversations in our society right now, I think that this is an important film to watch right now in order to help us understand some of these issues that are happening and why things need to change, and also to help support Black filmmakers and their stories. So that's my spotlight for this week.
Cool. Nice. And I tried to watch Emma last week, but our one movie of the week was Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. But I really want to watch Emma.
It's okay. But I mean, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood's not bad. I mean, I saw it in the movie theater last year. I just thought, remember what movie theaters were? Yeah, me too. But, but yeah, it's okay. But I'd love to know what you think of what you think of it, though.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, I wanted to put a spotlight on 846 by Dave Chappelle. So today we're recording this on June 14th. I think this came out 2 days ago. So Dave Chappelle did a private outdoor stand-up show where people were socially distanced in some town in Ohio. I'm not even really sure where it was. And this 30-minute monologue is an excerpt from that, where, I mean, 846 is, I'm pretty sure, the amount of time that George Floyd was asphyxiated before, or had the knee on his neck. And it's really powerful. Like, it's Dave Chappelle, amazing comedian, one of the best, so it's funny, but it's mostly it's heavy. And I think he talks specifically about like people calling on celebrities to make statements, and Dave Chappelle saying his reasons why he felt like he needed to step back and let the community as a large speak. And yeah, like Dave Chappelle is an amazing storyteller. He relates all these events together and kind of like the patterns of police brutality and racial injustice that we're seeing, and also to his own life. It's really incredible. Like, it's a half an hour monologue, and I don't think anyone could do it in the way that Dave Chappelle does. It's on YouTube. It's I think it was published by Netflix as a joke, but for some reason I couldn't find it on Netflix. But if you just Google 846, you should find it, and we'll put it in the show notes as well.
It's also on his Instagram. It's an IGTV, so.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I think he wanted to make it as accessible as possible to everyone.
Nice.
Which is probably why it's not on Netflix, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know. I watched it last night, Morley.
Yeah, me too. I watched it as I was making dinner.
Oh. My Into the Spotlight is going to be Remedy Studios by my friend Emily Noel Morbido. She's also a recent graduate of Parsons School of Design, and she created a clothing brand, and it was originally started as her thesis, and she's taking it past thesis as well. So it's going to be, she's a New York-based designer and artist seeking solutions to barriers of disability and consequences of climate change. So she likes to create clothes that help people with disabilities. Like her grandfather with Alzheimer's, for example, is where this all started, and making it so it's more accessible for him to put on clothes and dress easier. Anyways, so she has a Kickstarter on Kickstarter.com. If you look up Remedy by Emily Noel Morbido, so she's raising money to start continuing her brand.
Cool. That's so interesting.
Yeah.
I feel like you mentioned a few times like these projects you do in art school where you have to think like so out of the box and a solution to a like specific problem, and it sounds like it's the perfect like primer for projects like that.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
It is, yeah. She's wonderful. She's so great. So, support her if you can.
Sweet, I'll check it out.
I'll get right on that.
All right, well, thank you for joining us this week. We hope you enjoyed the episode. Thanks so much to Julia for coming on. If you enjoyed the episode, please share the show with people who you think may like it, and maybe people who you don't think will not like it, but you liked it. You can find me at YellRonBlog. You can find Ryan at rye.o'connor. And collectively, you can find us at Into the Spotlight Podcast on Instagram. And we do have a Twitter as well. But because for whatever reason, Twitter has a 15-character limit, we are at @into_spotlight. Kind of a shame, but it is what it is. Just Google search Into the Spotlight Podcast. You'll find it. Julia, where can people find you?
So you can find me on Instagram first and foremost at jmac25, JMAC25, and my website is Julia McGillicuddy. It's a really long last name, I'm sorry, but I won't spell it out. If you look me up on Instagram, you can find my website on my Instagram.
It shares the name with a whiskey, right?
Yeah, yep. Well, McGillicuddy, really? Dr. McGillicuddy. They have peppermint schnapps, all of that.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Mostly a Massachusetts thing.
That's incredible.
So good. And anyways, my website is juliamcgillicuddy.wix.com, but I'm looking to change that, so it's just Julia McGillicuddy, so stay tuned.
Sweet.
That's great.
And I'll link all that in the show notes, so no one has to remember any spellings.
Oh, and Equal Fans, at Equal Fans on Instagram, and Workmens Denim is at Workmens Denim. So any of my projects are also linked on my Instagram.
Sweet.
Perfect. All right.
Thanks,
all right, guys. Well, this has been great.
Yes, thank you so much for coming on to the show. Congratulations on graduating art school, and we're really excited to see what you're going to do next.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. It was really fun.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Ciao, guys. Bye.